Good afternoon. We gather together today to celebrate the life of Joan Sabatino, who lived on this earth for 72 years and now lives in a realm we all shall call home in the days to come. We come together in joy that she touched our lives with her love. We come together in sadness that she is physically gone from our midst. We come together in hope that our celebration will honor her life and ease our sorrow. I'm Dot Everhart, a chaplain with Hospice for All Seasons, which is located in Grantville, Pennsylvania. And for those of you who skipped Pennsylvania geography, that's just slightly east of Harrisburg, our state capital. I met Joan when she became one of our patients, having been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. While there was some hesitation on her part and the family's part to accept an unknown chaplain, once they found out I had been UU, I was welcomed with open arms. When I met Joan, we shared many similar theological perspectives. We'd both attended seminary and served in a variety of capacities and faith communities. A special one for her was this community in State College, where she was the director of religious education. I saw a number of younger folks who are here today. How many of you came because you knew Joan as the director of religious education? Wonderful, thank you. She also served as the pastor of the UU congregation in Indiana, Pennsylvania. How many are from Indiana? Made a trek through the snowy hills of Pennsylvania. Thank you. Her ashes will be interred at that congregation in their memorial garden, and we're recording the service so that those who could not join us in person will be able to view the service later. Reverend Tracy.
Let us pause now for a moment of prayer. Spirit of life, source of love, we pause now to be still, to breathe in each moment of life with gratitude for all its blessings. And yes, even all of its challenges, for we know the hardness of life makes the blessings more sweet. We pause to affirm the seasons of life, the cycles of life and death, for we know that we too are part of this endless and mysterious cycle. Today, we acknowledge this winter season with the snow blanketing the trees and the sky heavy and gray. There is pain and grief in these days that reflect our own weight of loss heavy on our hearts. And so we pause to be warmed by the love we know and have known. Let us give thanks for Joan, whose light of love persists through death and lives in those who knew her. When we pause, we remember how her life gave us a path and a little light to see by, and it encourages us to help carry that light forward. We light this chalice today to honor the life of a truly bright light, Joan Sabatino. Let us enter into a moment of silence. Amen.
If you are a faithful reader of the UU World magazine, you might recognize these words that appeared in an edition several months ago. They were written by Catherine Hamilton Warren, a writer whose mother had passed and was cremated, and she offers this reflection. Where is my mother now? It's easy enough to say what has become of her body. I know that most of her was turned into smoke and taken up into the clouds above the Sacramento Valley, that particles of what was my mother may now be scudding across the sky or falling down in rain on fields of sunflowers and grapes. My family and I took her ashes from California to Washington State, her home, to set them adrift on the currents of Puget Sound, where I imagine they embarked on a journey past schools of herring and honking harbor seals. Now, many of us want our cremains to be set afloat on public water, but the authorities don't really approve of that. So if you decide to do that, just do it quietly and carefully. But what of my mother's spirit, her energy, the person and the presence brought into being by that utterly contingent constellation of atoms? This, of course, is the great question about which science-based theory says this: energy can neither be created or destroyed, only transferred or transformed. My mother's spirit is now in my voice, together as we laugh. As I sing to my daughter at night, it lives in every letter she wrote and in every quilt she stitched. My family and I can conjure her presence with us when we drink together and laugh, when we keep faith with her, when we look around and notice and act for the good. That, I think, is the kind of eternal life she would have wanted. I'm going to have some sharing now by family and friends who will introduce themselves in terms of how they knew Joan in her very active and important life. I'm going to start, I believe, with Aaron.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joan's daughter, Jess, and this is Jonna, for those of you who don't know. A surprise speaker, because you'll notice I was not in the program. And that's because I contemplated whether or not I would be able to do this without tears. Although my mom was no stranger to tears when she was presenting, and you would know that if you attended a wedding ceremony that she officiated. She cried at most of them, if not all. It was the happy moments, like weddings, that got her the most emotional. She officiated my own wedding and cried the whole time. But she still managed to get her beautiful words out, and I can too. However, in true Joan fashion, I'll admit, I wrote this morning as I paced my kitchen with my 7-week-old. Yep, Mom was always a multitasker and a procrastinator. And I did also bring Plan B back there, just in case I couldn't get through it. When we found out my mom was in her final days, the hospice nurses said they thought it would be a day before she was gone. 3 days later, she was still here. The nurse said although her body was shutting down, her heart was strong and keeping her alive, which is just so fitting. On the day my mom passed, as my sisters and my aunt sat around her, telling stories and holding her hand, someone mentioned it was the hunter moon, the final full moon of the harvest season, symbolizing completion. And this year's harvest moon was extra special because it was also a supermoon, meaning the moon would be brighter and larger. My mom took her final breath 6 minutes before the super hunter moon was visible. My mom was the spiritual one and the believer in something greater, and I have always been the skeptic. But however, I do believe this was my mom leaving us on her own terms in a way she was able to have closure. It also gives me hope that she'll be here with us as I now see signs of the moon pop up and I try to believe it's her. I was 30 weeks pregnant when my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and 36 weeks when she passed away. The baby was with me through this, and will always have a part of my mom with her as such. When the baby was born, we still hadn't decided on a name. But at the hospital, we could see the moon, which was just about as full as it was when my mom passed, out the hospital window, and we decided to name the baby Luna. Luna was born with minor health conditions, nothing serious, but still very scary and even harder as I was dealing with grieving my mom. But before one of our appointments, I was anxious and scared, and I walked in, and there was a painting of a barn, and in the sky was a large full moon. And I thought, thanks, Mom, it's going to be okay. Many of you have asked what you can do for us. No one can replace my mom or take her grief away. I know many of you wish you could, but I ask you to all keep in touch and be in our lives going forward, and continue to spread her faith, leadership, and kindness to those around you. Please join us afterwards in the social hall for small bites and drinks. You know, if my mom wasn't fighting for social justice or organizing something or preaching, she was having a glass of wine and good food with family and friends. So that's how we'll celebrate her. And now we'll hear from various people who knew my mom. We have tried to find someone from each aspect of her accomplished life to speak about her. But no, there's still so much more to be said. We thank you all for being here and supporting us and celebrating my mom.
Good afternoon. I'm Helen Dempsey. When I first arrived at this fellowship in September 1986, the very first person I met was Joan Sabatino. Joan was the director of religious education, and she welcomed me and my 3 daughters into what would quickly become our spiritual home. Before long, Joan and I discovered that we were both from Philadelphia, and we had both attended the same high school, although at different times. Joan and I became fast friends, as did the 2 Roos girls and the 3 Dempsey girls. Joan pulled us into her family's orbit and included us in so many of her family activities. Joan was this congregation's first paid professional director of religious education, and she held that position until she left to study for the ministry. As DRE, she introduced the use of formalized UUA curricula into the religious education program, both for adults and for children. I participated in a parents' class she led, and for me, a new person in town, it was a lifesaver. Thanks to Joan, State College started to feel like home. I still have close friends from that group, and I had the good fortune to get to know Joan even better. In 1989, Joan and I took a road trip to Connecticut for the UU General Assembly. It was my first experience with UUs outside of State College, and Joan was the best guide. She seemed so comfortable, and she fit right in, even though it was a new situation for her too. I think it was because Joan was always so open and welcoming, and she never met a stranger. Joan had an impact on many areas of the UUFCC besides RE. She was a key member of the building committee that was responsible for purchasing this land and planning our beautiful building. As an aside, be sure to check out the painting of the building created by Joan's father, John Sabatino, and presented as a gift to this fellowship at the building dedication ceremony in 1991. It's in the seating area out in the lobby. In the 1980s and into the 1990s, our congregation held an all-fellowship weekend retreat each May at nearby Stone Valley. For many of us, it was the highlight of the fellowship year. It was a throwback to another time. There was a campfire and a talent show, and groups of kids roamed freely around the grounds. And there was so much delicious food. For many years, Joan was in charge of organizing and overseeing the entire weekend. Of course she was, because as everyone sitting in this room will agree, if you wanted something done right, Joan was the person you depended on to make it happen. She organized the entire meal plan and ordered the food. She created sign-ups for all the jobs. She was the first person to arrive on Friday afternoon and last person to leave on Sunday, after she was certain that we'd left the place just like we had found it. I helped her with some of the tasks during the weekend, so I know firsthand all that she did to make the retreat a success. And she had a knack for making work seem like fun. Some years, Joan would organize the Sunday worship service at Stone Valley. I remember vividly the year she had all of us, at least 100 people, kids and grown-ups, form a ring around the field beyond the tents. She passed out balls of yarn and instructed us to toss them back and forth and diagonally until eventually we formed a web, a physical manifestation of the interdependent web of life. I've participated in a similar activity several times since then, but nothing can match the time when 100 UUs followed Joan's directions and created what seemed like magic. Joan taught me so many lessons throughout the years. How to do a good job without the need to constantly call attention to yourself. How to interact with difficult people and still maintain a state of grace. You all know there's a story there, but my lips are sealed. And Joan taught me how to make spinach balls when she recruited a bunch of us to prepare mounds of them for a ministerial installation in 1987. I still have the original typewritten recipe she gave me way back then, and I've been making them ever since. But most importantly, Joan showed me how to be a good friend. And even after she moved away from State College, we maintained the kind of friendship where you don't see each other for a very long time, and then when you do, you pick right up where you left off. I treasure all my memories of Joan and the times we spent together over the years. Joan will always, always be in my heart.
Do you need this?
You can pretend to be tall.
Hello, I'm in. Hello, I'm Barb Stone. Higher? There you go. Okay. I have a reading from Circle of Stones, Woman's Journey to Herself by Judith Durek. How might your life have been different if there had been a place for you? A place for you to go, a place of women to help you learn the ways of women. A place where you were nurtured from an ancient flow, sustaining you and steadying you as you sought to become yourself. A place of women to help you find and trust the ancient flow already there within you, waiting to be released. A place of women. How might your life be different? How would your life be different with experiences like these? Joan provided such a space for women of the UU and the broader community. I am here to share the particular way that Joan deeply touched several of us who are here today and many more who are not present. About 30 years ago, Joan began offering an adult curriculum from the UUA called Cakes for the Queen of Heaven. Those of us who were part of Cakes, as we lovingly call it, had a wonderful opportunity of finding out. Cakes was a curriculum that explored women's journey to self-discovery through the study of the sacred feminine. It gave us an introduction to ancient goddess traditions and cultures where women were leaders and the feminine was worshipped. Joan brought a special magic to this curriculum. With her characteristic grace and humor, she enabled us to expand in self-awareness, compassion, and love. We each evolved in our own way. At the beginning of each session, Joan asked us to leave our day at the door. She would say, our worries and concerns could wait quite nicely, and we could pick them up on our way home. We were here today to be together, and it was a time to focus on ourselves. Joan led with such ease that it felt effortless for her to create our safe space, a place where we could speak freely and openly from our hearts. In that space, through experiences of music, art, dance, and journaling, our hearts and minds were opened to a new self, one which validated and affirmed our own experience of being women. At each session, we would create a circle by holding hands. When we held each other's hands, we felt deeply rooted in the earth and connected to each other, creating the sense of a sacred space. Joan had a way of making each one of us feel seen, heard, and loved. We developed a deep sense of community within that circle. It is still a part of us today. How are our lives different? We are different because of the wise and loving touch of Joan. When our Cakes classes ended, our group was not done. With one small, strong, consistent core and some rotating members, we continued to meet weekly for 10 years. Today, our meetings are less frequent, but when we sit in a circle and hold hands, the magic returns. Holding and strengthening us still because of Joan. Joan is forever with us. She is still in our circle. She is holding our hands. She is holding our hearts. We love and miss her.
I'm Michaelina Olmsted, and I'm from the First UU Church of Indiana, PA. I met Joan in 2007, shortly after I retired from my teaching position. And today I want to thank the daughters for inviting me to share my personal reflections about Reverend Joan with you. Most of the words you will hear were spoken to Reverend Joan a few hours before she died. I've met many interesting, creative, and accomplished women in a variety of settings over my lifetime. I found Reverend Joan to be the most unique and a radiant woman. Her spirit always was shining, and I think many of you experienced her in a similar way after listening to the two speakers before me. I should tell you that I do believe in the ever-present universal power, and that power led me to her. After filling out, I don't know if you have it at this church, but our church in Indiana has a little blue card that you fill out if you want to find out more about the church and the activities. So I received my first phone call from Reverend Joan, and the call ended with a plan to meet up for coffee. It was the first of many coffee conversations. We met at Commonplace Coffee House on the IUP campus. To do this, it was going to be on a Wednesday morning. I said 10 a.m., no more than 2 hours time, and then we're going to leave together. And that time, that call and place and time was important because I thought that I would help out with some of the activities that Joan had in mind. And I distinctly remember saying, I've always wanted to work after retirement one morning a week. Wednesday morning, I want to leave at noon, so I would experience the, oh my God, where did the weekend go, to immediately followed with TGIF, it's Friday feeling. And I did that in a 2-hour time period. Just like Reverend Joan would do, she smiled and quietly laughed, but I thought we had a deal. She did not. So together, that dream, one morning a week, was not going to be enough to accomplish her goals for First UU Church of Indiana, PA. It was at that very first meeting I felt a kinship with Reverend Joan. Reverend Joan was authentic. She never pretended who she was. She was a most loving mother and never took her daughters for granted. She was supportive of and supported by her brother, her sister, their spouses, nieces, and nephews. She cared deeply for each member of her congregation. She listened carefully to those who were sharing with her. Her words were honest, and her guidance was from a place of love. What you saw is what you got with Reverend Joan. And for me, that was incredibly refreshing. Reverend Joan was passionate. Her calling was to change the world in which she found herself for the better. She was able to look past obstacles and see the finished results when others, including myself, could not. Now, Reverend Joan was assertive, but in a very good way. When you have a passion like she did, assertiveness isn't far behind. She placed herself in difficult situations to share a message of hope and solidarity for equality and social justice. She led her peeps, I was one of them, and I see a lot out there too, in marches, protests, and prayers. So a positive presence was seen in public areas, not just within the church. This was done so others in our community could not ignore the results of acts of hate or to see the joy brought on by acts of love. And Reverend Joan was a visionary. She saw the congregation and the actions of First UU Indiana as a way to invite the greater Indiana County community to a safe gathering place for all. First UU membership expanded through deliberate outreach and media attention to all the good acts of kindness done by individual members and as a congregation. They were essential messages of hope and have continued since she left Indiana. Visionaries, such as Reverend Joan, know their good works will carry on because a team of dedicated church members and leaders had also been invited to witness her vision. Reverend Joan introduced me into the first UU community, she led a group of diverse people made up of so many passionate, articulate men and women who were in leadership positions at the church. This was a new experience for me, since I had taught in a male-dominated career and technical education high school settings. I learned I could use my voice easily among the congregation and leaders of the church. Together with the artistic leaders, a new logo was developed to become the iconic representation of the church. Working with a Pittsburgh digital media expert, a new interactive website was created and updated to showcase the many Love in Action events taking place. Growing awareness of social activism was the foundation. In response, the congregation grew with young families, and a building expansion took place, and just learned that this whole building was a part of Joan is not a surprise. It was my beginning to venture into experiences where I could use my authentic voice assertively and compassionately. It was so easy to do, since Reverend Joan modeled being compassionately passionate so freely. Joan had big love. I thank her for sharing her beautiful family with me. My husband Gary and I were honored to be included in her personal life. For me, it was another way to learn about what drove her to do good work everywhere she decided to be. Joan was also like a best friend, a sister friend. So while we were planning and working, more than that 2 hour on Wednesday mornings, we also shared our stories about being short, curvy Italian women. And that led to shopping tips and fashion choices and sharing and hairstyles and colors. And of course, my favorite was accessories of all types. Being in a predominantly man's world, Joan developed a style which allowed her to feel the confidence necessary to go from one setting or meeting to another, empowered to be seen and heard. I will never stop loving her. Joan will continue to be a part of my heart song. One of the kindnesses Joan gave me after my mother died was a book of poems and written thoughts by E.E. Cummings about loss and overcoming sadness. I will share a favorite poem by him. It brings me peace when I must say goodbye. To a person I've loved. I carry your heart with me. I carry it in my heart. I am never without it. Anywhere I go, you go, and whatever is done by only me is your doing. I fear no fate. I want no world, for you are in my world, and it's you are whatever a moon has always meant, and whatever a sun will always sing to you. Here's the deepest secret nobody knows. Here's the root of the root, the bud of the bud, the sky of the sky of a tree called life, which grows higher than a soul can hope or a mind can hide. And this is the wonder that keeps our stars apart. I carry your heart. I carry it in my heart.
Hi, my name is Gerald Smith. I am from the Indiana congregation. Thank you to the daughters for asking me to speak here on behalf of some of the Indiana community and about Reverend Joan. I have to say it's an enormous weight of responsibility to try and represent Joan's impact on our community. And so I'm not going to try to represent everyone. So you folks will have to come to Indiana and experience when we inter her into our memorial garden. I came to the church shortly after we moved to Indiana in 2010, and I know many folks in the room were founding members of the first UU Fellowship and were part of the church from 1999 when Reverend Joan first came. And I know many folks in Indiana knew her well. I know you're also not afraid to speak up, so if I'm here and I screw up, go ahead and shout at me. Feel free. I also had the privilege of starting a new organization with Reverend Joan around 2011, the Center for Community Growth. I've been organizing around fracking and fighting against a new well that was illegally started just outside Yellow Creek State Park. Since all good progressive movements run through UU churches, it was not long before I was at First UU encouraging folks to get involved. A year after the fracking fight, Reverend Joan and I and a few here in the room realized that Indiana needed an organized, active, progressive voice to balance out the overwhelmingly conservative political and social values which dominated the landscape. With eyes wide open to this reality, the goal was simply to have a presence in town. The goal was to actively promote progressive values in the public sphere and to shift public policy. Reverend Joan was an inspiration to me in this work, and I think to a lot of others around her. It's not easy living and working deep in red country these days. The rhetoric, the division, the actual things that people say can be harmful and demoralizing to anybody believing in social justice. The Obama campaign actually called our region Thunderdome, after the Mad Max film's depiction of a deadly fighting arena. I don't have to tell anyone here how difficult it can be to maintain our UU values as well as respect and love for our neighbors. I don't have to tell anyone here how hard it can be and how difficult it can be to stand up for these values, particularly in the face of what can seem to be angry opposition. In this minority position, conversations about campaign tactics often end up wordsmithing to try and gain the approval of the opposition. And a natural reaction to this experience is to disengage. However, Reverend Joan did not disengage, nor did she worry too much about what the other side would say. Instead, she stood firmly in her belief in the inherent worth and dignity, all the way to the interconnected web. She did not just every Sunday from the pulpit, but across the community as well, organizing faith leaders, speaking at rallies, pressing public officials on issues such as living wages, expanded healthcare access. Even internally, a story I remember well when we were putting together our mission statement for the Center for Community Growth. We have a long one. It is leading individuals and organizations in and around Indiana County to promote social, racial, gender, LGBTQIA+, economic and environmental justice, the whole list. At the time, there was a suggestion that this is too long, that we risk mission creep, that we could shorten the list and just say social justice. However, Reverend Joan said, no, this is not what we need to do. We need to focus our efforts. We need to have a broad spectrum, and it would be too easy to ignore things that were uncomfortable. My pages got messed up. Reverend Joan was an inspiration to me because she gave what I call social justice guilt. I spent a bit of time as a Catholic growing up, and I always was impressed by their organizing tactics. Fear of eternal damnation combined with no birth control are really effective ways to build membership. Obviously, this kind of dogma doesn't work in most UU congregations, but there is still this social justice guilt that Reverend Joan would have listened for me from the pulpit. Her sermons reminded me of the humanity of our community, reminded me of the organized efforts of oppression that exist. It reminded me that to be thoughtful and loving, it reminded me that standing on the side of love is the only path to true social justice. So instead of worrying whether or not I said enough Hail Marys, I'd sit and think, have I done anything, all I needed for our next rally? Or our justice campaign? Have I made enough calls? Have I leveraged my privilege as much as I can? And so I sometimes send emails at church. Reverend Joan was an inspiration to me because she understood that building towards justice meant building institutions. First, Indiana's footprint in town increased dramatically while she was there, both physically with our new building and socially across the community. Our membership has an outsized influence on public policy. And I'm proud to say that the organization we founded together, the Center for Community Growth, is just last night interviewing for our first executive director. In these interviews, one of our applicants asked us, the interview team, a question that made me think of Reverend Joan. The applicant simply asked, why are you doing this? This is a volunteer organization. You know, I've got a day job. Everybody else does too. Why are we spending time in a, a lot of folks would say swimming upstream in a very conservative area? Why do you spend your time, volunteer time, organizing around these progressive values in such a difficult environment? And it's a great question. I thought of Reverend Joan, and I also thought of my favorite quote from MLK about the arc of the moral universe and how it bends towards justice. I believe in this, but I don't think it bends on its own. We have to be there dragging it, pointing it towards the beloved community. This is the never-ending work of social justice, and this is what it means to stand on the side of love. Reverend Joan helped me and Indiana remember this and live this. And indeed, it's how she ended each sermon. And I'm stealing her words. Go in peace, travel lightly on this earth, never lose your passion for peace and social justice, and may your Unitarian Universalist values guide you in your day-to-day living. Thank you.
I snuck in. She wasn't sure I was here. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm State Representative Paul Takak. I actually represent this area in Harrisburg. And unlike many of you, I did not meet Reverend Joan at first in the context of either the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship here or in Indiana. And by the way, I've never been able to call her anything except Reverend Joan, so I will continue to do that. But when it was after I began running for the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and Peg Dobrinska introduced me to Reverend Joan in her capacity as director of UUJusticePA, and you'll be hearing from Bill Clinton, it appears here soon too as well. But went through that process. I'm very proud to say that was the first ever endorsement that I received as a political candidate. But while all of our initial meetings were via Zoom, it didn't take me long to realize how fully engaged Reverend Joan was in the fabric of Pennsylvania and Harrisburg politics, especially in the state capitol. She was always advocating for causes and issues aligned with UU values. And I want to tell you a little story that literally started on day one of my first term. You may know that on January 3rd of 2023, Reverend Joan was accorded the very great honor of delivering the opening prayer on swearing-in day of the 207th legislative session of the Pennsylvania General Assembly. But that was just the first of so many days over the next 2 years that I saw her in the Capitol. Through countless meetings, hearings, and events, Reverend Joan was always there. And she was not very tall in stature, but with her yellow stole, with the rainbow and love over it, she was always a great presence. Her stature was always there, and she was a towering presence. And Gerald, I may steal the Thunderdome reference and use it for the Pennsylvania Capitol going forward. I think it might be appropriate. But she was a constant presence and a source of inspiration and encouragement. And I really always enjoyed every time I saw her, invited her to come back, and we would sit in my office in the Capitol and visit. And it was always very, very grounding. She suggested things for me to read. We talked about the things that were going on, and I just really came to appreciate how strongly she felt that her faith compelled her to be there in the fight, as it were, living and staying true to her UU values and beliefs. She believed that politics could be a source of good in the world, a positive force for people and for the planet, that what we did in that building could be noble and righteous, to help us live up to the highest values and ideals of any religious faith tradition or humanism. She always led with love and with grace, with insight and reason, and both passion and compassion. Earlier this week, we lost someone else cut from that same cloth, President Jimmy Carter. He too led with decency, integrity, intelligence, and values. And it's now clear to me that one of the reasons that his presidency was criticized, especially at the time, was that he made decisions that weren't always in his best interest, but always in ours. And that is what true servant leadership is all about. And that's what Reverend Joan always espoused. With her characteristic gentleness, persistence, always persistence, and grace, she was always there reminding me and all of us why we were there and who we were there to serve. And that's something I have and will always try to remember, which brings me right back to that opening prayer on swearing in day, almost exactly 2 years ago. We're going to be sworn in again on Tuesday. But thanks to the House Journal, her words are forever enshrined in the record, and you can go read them yourself. But with your indulgence, I'd like to share some of what she shared with us that day in her own words. She began by noting that we had been chosen by our people, our constituents, and that we were there to serve their needs and the needs of everyone and all those in the Commonwealth and in our world. She reminded us of the inherent worth and dignity of each individual. She implored us to honor and to respect diversity in all of its forms. She prayed that the laws we would pass would be based on equity, care, and compassion. She asked us to reflect often and to remain true and faithful to our values each and every day. And she reminded us of that interdependent web of life. In her words, our decisions not only affect human existence, but also the earth on which we are sustained. And finally, I can think of no better way to close today than by closing as she did on that cold January day 2 years ago. Spirit of life and love, thank you for all the blessings of our lives. May we move forward today with a new understanding of our responsibilities to serve others, and may we do so with kindness, care, compassion, and love. So may it be, Reverend Joan. So may it be. Thank you.
So good afternoon. My name is Bill Clinton. I am the local Bill Clinton, not the national Bill Clinton. And I'm a longtime Unitarian Universalist. My UU Church is in Delaware County, which is one of the collar counties right outside of Philadelphia. I am also the president of the board of UUJusticePA, where we are very fortunate to have had Joan serve as our director for the past 5 years. I really appreciate this opportunity to tell you about my friend and colleague, Joan Sabatino, and the work that she and our board did together to advance justice in Pennsylvania. UUJusticePA was founded in 2010, just 15 years ago, to bring to Harrisburg the voice and values of Unitarian Universalists. The mission of UU Justice is to promote voting, advocacy of social justice issues, and electing UUs to the PA legislature. Now, we are all familiar, and several references have been made this morning, to the story about Joan retiring from the ministry in Indiana, PA, and moving to Harrisburg to be near her daughter Jonah and her daughter Jonah. There, she explored an interest she had in being the lobbyist for Unitarian Universalism. Now, given the complexity and the politics of legislating, she needed to test her effectiveness in having an impact on the legislative process, as if she needed to be tested, right? So after a few months in the role, Joan decided that she liked it, and she wanted to take on the challenge of being UU's lobbyist in Harrisburg and moving the organization forward. The board did a very smart thing and responded by hiring her as our executive director, and this was in 2019, just before the pandemic. In 5 short years, Joan transformed UUJusticePA. First, and there's been several references to this already, she made us more visible by showing up at the state capitol wearing her bright yellow stole, and she looked magnificent in it. She then made it her business to introduce our organization's goals to legislators and learn about their key interests. She was very strong in developing relationships. Among those legislators, and the story has already been told by Representative Takak, was Joanna McClinton, who became the Speaker of the House when the Democrats took the majority. Now, you may not know, but Joanna McClinton is a minister from Philadelphia. And she and Joan connected in a way that was very strong. And Speaker McClinton invited her to do the opening prayer. And for so many of us in the activist community among Unitarians, we just reflected on how strong Joan's impression was that she left on the legislature that day, and her words are still available to motivate all of us. Now, Joan continued to make our organization more visible to our 1,400 supporters of UU Justice. She spearheaded revamping of our website and hired a social media expert to expand our outreach. These changes enabled us to better respond, and she sent out a whole stream of action alerts of what people should be doing to respond to the current situation. Some of the other reasons why she was succeeded in her role was Joan, and it sounds like I've heard this theme again and again. She set ambitious goals. There was nothing quiet about what she wanted to achieve, and she inspired us and our UUs across the state to achieve them. She established relationships with other statewide organizations that became important partners in our justice work. She was not shy. She organized impactful lobby days and other events. She sought to engage younger members in our justice work, and we all know how important this is to bring in the next generation, and she was so effective in that. She strengthened our financial position. Yes, you need money to run an organization. And she expanded the staff. She recognized talented people, and she created for us a very effective team. So why did I love working with Joan? I always look forward to connecting with her in our many Zoom calls. I loved to hear her ambitious plans she had for the organization. As many people have said, she was playful, and frequently brought humor to tense situations. She supported me as a leader by always looking at the possibilities rather than the barriers. She was positive and creative in how to take on challenges. She modeled for me activism and inspired me to move forward. So I want to thank Joan for being my friend and colleague on this journey to create the beloved community that we all seek. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Lisa Merlino, and I am Joan's younger sister. First, on behalf of Jessica and Lori, Jonna and Eliza, Aaron and Bill, and my brother Craig, I would like to thank you all for attending this memorial service and celebration of life for Joan. We are grateful for each one of you being here today, especially those who have traveled quite a distance to join us. We have just heard about Joan's many achievements as a feminist, minister, lobbyist, community activist, and friend. But I'm here today to tell you about my sister Joan and what she meant to me. My sister was the professional speaker. I can only hope that she will guide me from above to get through this without making a total fool of myself by openly weeping. So in advance, I apologize for the tears. Joan did confide in me on numerous occasions that when she officiated at many weddings over the years, she would get a bit weepy at times, especially at those weddings she performed for family members. But here goes. My earliest memories are of Joan and I always being together. You see, we were what they called back in the day Irish twins. We were only 15 months apart. My mom dressed us alike despite our being different sizes, and I was her shadow. Of all my early childhood memories, the one that stands out the most is that Joan and I always shared a bedroom, starting on Garrett Street where we lived with our grandfather, and then in Churchville. When we moved back to South Philadelphia in the late 60s, we had adjacent rooms with a door between our rooms that we always kept open so that we could stay connected and talk to each other while falling asleep, even though we now had our own rooms. And then my father renovated the house on Lambert Street, and that door came down and a wall went up, but we still had our bond. I always wanted to be like my big sister. She was the pretty one, the thin one, the smart one. She was the constant leader and always in control. Very sadly, we were raised in a dysfunctional home. Our mother was an alcoholic. I remember going to Joan when I was just a little girl after I discovered empty whiskey bottles hidden in my bureau drawers and tearfully telling her, "I think Mommy drinks." She comforted my suspicions, dried my tears, gave me a big hug, and told me not to worry. She would always take care of Craig and I. Even at such a young age, she took the lead. When Joan went to high school, it was the first time that we were not together in the same school, just one grade apart. I remember patiently waiting for her to come home from high school so that we could watch our favorite soap operas together, sitting at the kitchen table, eating tasty cakes and sometimes baby food. Yes, we loved putting strained fruit into baby oatmeal cereal. A little strange, but it was good. We both disliked our curly, frizzy, crazy Italian hair. I remember us straightening each other's hair with curl-free, which had a god-awful smell, and sometimes even ironing our hair, literally spreading our hair out on an ironing board, laying down a piece of wax paper over the hair and applying a hot iron over the wax paper, a prehistoric flat iron. We used to set our hair in curlers the size of soup cans just to get rid of the curls and waves. Obviously, we stopped doing that. I remember the summers when we would go to Long Beach Island, where we would swim in the ocean for hours, collect seashells on the beach, and bury our little brother in the sand together. We had learned to play the card game 500 Rummy from our neighbor Maria Bonadonna, and we played that card game several times a day, even on the beach. Playing that game of 500 Rummy continued throughout the years whenever we were together. Nothing gave me more pleasure than beating her at that game, which wasn't very often. And then it happened. Joan became a teenager and started to date, and then I really wanted to be like my big sister. We weren't as close as we once were. It was the early 70s, and Joan became a hippie, a free spirit who marched to her own drummer, someone who didn't follow the rules. I am sure you all here have seen the movie Forrest Gump. Well, I've referred to Joan as my Jenny, a perfect description of who she had become. I, on the other hand, was the obedient one, always following the rules and doing what was expected of me, not confident like her and afraid to buck the system. I admired her independence and once again wanted to be like my big sister. She continued to be in charge at home, always leaving tasks for me to do, and I always followed her orders. And as much as it was not an easy life for the three of us growing up, Joan was the oldest, and she accepted her leadership role in stride and made the best of the situation. She had to grow up very quickly and assume the role of big sister and surrogate mother. I believe that truly helped to mold her and give her the ability to take on the various leadership roles that she had as an adult. Eventually, she was able to escape from South Philadelphia to State College, where she stayed for many years. It was here in State College that Joan continued her education, became a stepmother to Aaron, had her beautiful daughters, Jessica and Jonna, and discovered Unitarian Universalism. Joan embraced the UUs and joined the congregation here in Center County. She became the RE director, eventually getting her Master of Divinity for Ministers degree from Howard University, being ordained a UU minister, and ultimately becoming the minister of the First Unitarian Church in Indiana, Pennsylvania. We were raised Roman Catholic, and the UU religion was totally foreign to our family. But Joan's fiercely independent nature allowed her to continue on this path with the UUs because it was something she wanted and needed for herself and truly believed in. She was not afraid to face the reproaching comments and questions of others. As always with her confident personality, she just embraced it, made it a part of her life, and moved on. As we continued to grow older and our lives took us in different directions, I realized just how dissimilar Joan and I had become. She was a liberal, a feminist, always strong-willed, straightforward, confident, decisive, and serious. I, on the other hand, was emotional, sensitive, a worrier, compliant, accommodating, and the funny one. Joan barely tolerated my sense of humor. Many times when we were together, you would hear her say, "No jokes, Lisa." But I have to say, I was one of the few people who could make her smile and sometimes laugh, even against her better judgment. Several years ago, when she was in Indiana and I was visiting her for the weekend, I was awakened on a Sunday morning to her diligently typing away on her computer, preparing her sermon for that day's service. I jokingly said to her, "You sound like Click-Clack-Moo." She gave me that look and asked me what I was talking about. And I explained to her that our niece Nikki's favorite children's book that I had often read to her was Click-Clack-Moo, Cows That Type, and that's what she reminded me of, the typing cows. She did give me a smile, a little chuckle, and told me I was nuts. But from that day forward, whenever she had to go to write a sermon, she would always say to me, "I need to go click-clack-moo." So I guess my sense of humor did rub off on her a bit. Wherever Joan lived, I always made a point of visiting her to spend time with her and her girls. Most of our visits were short-lived, but I cherished each and every moment with my big sister. As we got older, Joan was the one that orchestrated our family get-togethers, making sure that we stayed connected and continued our games of 500 Mummy. One of our favorite places to gather was at our brother Craig's home in the Poconos. I have so many special memories of our times together there, and I'm so grateful that we were able to have one last visit there in August, right before her diagnosis, a memory that I will always cherish. When Joan retired from ministry and moved to Harrisburg to become a lobbyist and director of UU Justice, I had such admiration and respect for her commitment and dedication to the issues that meant so much to her, not to mention how very proud I was of her. And once again, I wanted to be like my big sister. I am the caregiver for my children and family, the warm and fuzzy one, the go-to person for whatever they need. I became a grandmother first, and whenever I would tell Joan things that I was doing for my grandchildren, she would say to me, "Don't expect me to do all the things that you do when I become a grandmother." And then along came Ada and Aaliyah. Talk about a game changer. I am sure I was not the only one who was surprised by her loving devotion to those two little girls when she became Nona. Now she was the warm and fuzzy go-to person. How fortunate Ada and Aaliyah were to have Nona in their lives, if even for such a short time. How unfortunate for Elijah and Luna that they will never get to know Nona. Despite our different personalities, we always had a special bond. Many years ago, she gave me a book titled Sister to Sister, Women Write About the Unbreakable Bond, which I kept by my bedside. The inscription she wrote said, "To my sister Lisa, I read the first page of this introduction and then bought us each a copy. Love always, Joan." Yes, she was tough, headstrong, opinionated, and a bit judgmental, but I guess she did have a soft spot for me. She was my very first best friend, someone I always looked up to, always admired, strived for validation from, and wanted to be like. It was a shock when we learned of her illness. Always the fighter with a determined nature, we had every confidence that she would beat this cancer that threatened her. She had so much more she wanted to do, issues to fight for, and lessons to teach and share with her children and grandchildren. It just had to come out okay, but somehow it didn't. The suffering that she endured was heart-wrenching for me. Watching this determined, strong-willed woman that I had so respected and admired my whole life succumb to this devastating disease was very hard for me. She fought a tough battle, but unfortunately, this one she didn't win. I remember sitting by her bedside, reading all the cards and notes that were sent to her during her illness, marveled by all the lives that she had touched and all the things she had done in her life, feeling extremely insignificant, and once again, I wanted to be like my big sister. I recall the numerous times I had attended Joan's UU services over the years where she had always asked the congregation to participate in sharing their joys and sorrows. I would like to share both the joy and sorrow with all of you now. My joy is how fortunate I was to be Joan's sister. My sorrow is that I have to spend the rest of my days without her. I miss you immensely, Joan, and still reach for my phone to call you, a habit that will be hard to break. I will always love you and carry you in my heart every day. Thank you.
And let the congregation say, wow. Years ago on public radio, there was a special show where they interviewed people called Desert Island Discs. And they asked people who, if they happened to be on a desert island, of course, with really great, record players and LP records available to them and electricity and all that great stuff, which 10 discs they would take with them to the desert island. While I could easily name 10 discs that I would take, I often think not so much about the music, but about the books that I would take. And one of the books that I would take was written by John O'Donohue, an Irish Catholic priest and poet. It's called To Bless the Space Between Us. And while I would recommend any of his books for someone who is looking to deepen your own spiritual life, this book about many blessings that really serve us well in the various times of our lives. Well, my computer just found a different way, but here it is. It's about how we grieve. When you lose someone you love, your life becomes strange. The ground beneath you gets fragile. Your thoughts make your eyes unsure, and some dead echo drags your voice down where words have no confidence. Your heart has grown heavy with loss, and though this loss has wounded others too, no one knows exactly what has been taken from you when the silence of absence deepens. Flickers of guilt kindle regret for all that was left unsaid or undone. Now there are days when you wake up happy again inside the fullness of life, until the moment breaks and you are thrown back onto that black tide of loss. Days when you have your heart back and you're able to function well, until in the middle of work or encounter, suddenly, with no warning, you are ambushed by grief. It becomes hard to trust yourself. All you can depend on now is that sorrow will remain faithful to itself. More than you, it knows its way and will find the right time to pull and pull the rope of grief until that coiled hill of tears has reduced to its last drop. Gradually, you will learn acquaintance of the invisible form of your departed, and when the work of grief is done, if it ever is, the wound of loss will heal, and you will have learned to wean your eyes from that gap in the air and be able to enter the hearth in your soul where your loved one has awaited your return all the time. You find the gray hymnal under your chair and turn to page 123. Please be seated. Thank you.
For Joan and for those who came before us, we offer gratitude and thanks. May their memories be a blessing. May we feel surrounded by their love. As we go forth from this time and place, let us be inspired by their courage, their wisdom, and their dreams. Let us honor them by doing the work of living boldly, loving mightily, and creating that beloved community here on earth. Amen, and blessed be.
At the end of UU services, we extinguish the chalice, but we remind ourselves that we take that light into ourselves, and that it will be that light, the light of Joan's life, the light of the spirit of love, that will carry us forward. And so as we extinguish the chalice, I would like you to reflect on taking that light into yourself, feeling that energy that inspired Joan for her life of service, and then go and do likewise. May it be so. You can do it. And now you are invited to the fellowship hall, which is behind the sanctuary, for a time of refreshment and fellowship.